Joining us today on behalf of the National Bank of Fujairah. I'm pleased to welcome you all. I am Gavin Quass and I'll be hosting today's webinar. The theme of today's event is restructuring your hiring strategy while preparing for 2021. As you may know, the National Bank of Fujairah has always supported SMEs in the UAE. These efforts are acknowledged year on year by a number of industry accolades, including the latest MEA Finance Awards, where NBF is titled as the best SME bank. Today's webinar is part of a knowledge sharing effort by the National Bank of Fujairah, where our aim is to increase awareness of common trends, challenges, and opportunities to help SMEs and business owners with resources not only to operate, but grow and develop even further in today's transforming environment. We have some excellent speakers today on the panel, and I look forward to hearing them all, and obviously, hopefully all of the attendees will get some very interesting information back. In order for you to make the most of today's session, we've included a set of polls. They are live at the moment. These polls will be live for roughly the next 10 minutes, and they help us to understand the thoughts, or to understand your thoughts and your challenges while planning for next year. We request you to take time and to take part in these polls as and when you see them appear on your screens. Towards the end of the webinar, we will also have a Q&A session. So in case you have any questions that come to mind during the session, please share them through the Q&A tab, and we will address them at the end of the session. So I think while we get started, I think that, the most important thing is that as we entered into 2020, there was a very big optimism, excitement. There was lots of things happening, particularly with Expo, and we saw that there was a great opportunity ahead. The UAE was very, very prepared, very well for the Expo, and we were envisaging a very, very positive future. But obviously, unfortunately, the COVID outbreak, changed the whole environment that we were in. Obviously, COVID-19 made us very aware that we as a human race are extremely interconnected. And it kind of, in some ways, gave us a bit of a reality in relation to understanding that some of the smaller things in life matter. Obviously, unfortunately, some of us lost family members, jobs, there was some finances, and our worlds were, in essence, turned upside down. But out of that sort of, dark period, there's actually, a new light, a new resurgence that is emerging. I think what it shows is our ability as humans to dig deep, to be innovative, to think outside the box. And this was evident in people doing things that would never normally happen. I remember seeing people running marathons in their lounges, because obviously they weren't allowed outside. You had communities. I remember in Spain seeing a whole community that was all singing from their balconies together as a way to be really engaged. Obviously, we've had standing ovations for our tremendous healthcare workers, and we've seen our children adapt to the new way of going to school, whether that's having to wear the face mask, social distancing. It really does show the human spirit being able to adapt. As we learn to live with COVID, and hopefully, with the vaccine coming along, the world is going to look to get back to being positive going forward, and obviously, good optimism. Budget season obviously has been in play for the last 3 months now, and as it comes to the end of it, we start thinking about next year. We plan for our budget. We're thinking, how do we grow next year, and what do we need if we can grow? Okay. So we're really trying to get things back to a normal way of working, and with that, what we've seen is a recent sort of spike in relation to potential employment opportunities, potential hiring, and obviously positive side. With that, though, there does come some concerns that employees and employers should be aware of in the current situation, so that we can come out of this with far more knowledge gained, and obviously the hiring process becomes far more easier for you as a business. So I'd like to take this opportunity to invite our first speaker. We have David Mackenzie from Mackenzie Jones on the line. And David, thanks very much for joining us.
A pleasure. Thank you very much for the invite. And weird enough, Gavin, I was one of those odd people that did a triathlon in my backyard in my half a swimming pool. So, and I'm now full of cold. The irony of that. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's much appreciated.
No problem. Thank you very much.
To give you a bit of an overview of who we are, so Mackenzie Jones as a group consists of three businesses. First one is Mackenzie Jones. Most of you will have heard of us. We're a sort of mid to senior end recruitment business. We've been here about 16 years now, so one of the longest standing ones. We also have another business called Women at Work, which is focused really originally on getting women back into the workplace through flexible working, which has been a great success. And then we have MENA Solutions, which is our project recruitment business. So we are a UAE company, but we operate predominantly in the UAE and Saudi, with obviously the other GCC countries as well.
Great, and I think for that, you know, you've talked about an area there, Women at Work. I think that's certainly going into next year a very interesting area that will grow further. How, if you were to shape the hiring market, maybe industries, you know, what's your kind of consensus at the moment around how that hiring market is, and sort of what industries are doing well, what are sort of maybe struggling a bit more? Yeah,
I think look the good news is I think the UAE has been very aggressive about coming out of this market, and we've seen probably an increase of about 35% on the job take we've had. The amount of senior roles we've got in. Now, the key markets for us, we're a head office recruitment company, so we only operate in certain areas. So we're functional specialists, but we're sector agnostic, so we cover every sector. So the areas we've seen that have grown, certainly in the last couple of months, have been HR, which was decimated during COVID. We've done a lot of C-suite roles recently as people started to gear up for more senior roles. And one of the areas that we've seen a lot of is the re-emergence of the SME market, which, to be frank, got absolutely battered by COVID. And the ones that survived have done very well to survive, as most of us have done. And I think we're going to see an increase in those entrepreneurs coming out who've either lost their jobs in big corporates and decided to take the chance to go and do their own thing now.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know, you know, as a bank as well, you know, we certainly have felt that, you know, the SME market is obviously done very well to say that it was obviously in the headwinds of it all. So I think that's you know, an interesting time ahead. What should you know, as we kind of look forward, what's your current feeling and sentiment, I guess, from employers when they are looking to hire? I know you mentioned there some C-suite roles, but sort of, just as an overview.
I think you've got to remember there are two ways of looking at it. If you're a client looking to use a recruitment company, you would only use a recruitment company for a very specific brief. So I think what you'll find, a lot of clients will go into the market through LinkedIn and through their own sources to find general talent. They only typically come to us for if they need sector specialism, or they need a quick search, confidential search, or there's a specific skill set they need that they haven't got either the skill to do it or the time to do it. So I think in terms of where we see the market going, I'm optimistic. But Gavin, I'm a recruiter. Of course, I'm optimistic. It's my DNA. But I think I do see next year as being, I'm cautiously optimistic to the extent we're growing. We've hired 3 additional consultants because we perceive the market as getting better, and we can back that up with job numbers as well.
Yes, and I think back to your original point you said there when you said, you know, for the businesses that have weathered the storm, actually what you'll find is operationally they'll come out of this a lot stronger, and therefore they'll be in a position to capitalise on that and then grow a lot faster.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of businesses that have been very blooded by this, and I think may wither away because they just don't have the stomach to continue on. And certainly in the Middle East, where it's a very elastic market, and we are boom and bust. And also, I think a lot of people have left the region. So some particular roles, i.e. talent management, we are struggling to fill senior talent roles. We're having to go back out into the external market to find those people.
Wow. How is, if we look at the hiring process, I know we talked offline about some of the hiring process that I saw change at the end of the financial crisis. How is that, or how do you envisage that process is changing, again, given the economic situation?
I think it's getting longer, if I'm honest with you. I think the days of quick hires are over. There again, we've had some clients that have, when they've given us briefs, they've moved extremely quickly because there's been a very key need. But if you're looking to fulfill your hiring plan, which I think most clients have gone off their hiring plan now, I think any remit now is taking 3 months to happen. I think also there's a real push, certainly from recruitment perspective, to stop clients lowballing candidates, which they are tending to do at the moment. And we're trying to say to them, look, you can lowball them now, you may get away with it, but in 6 months' time when the market's back, they'll leave your business and you'll have to rehire at the current level. So we're spending a lot of time engaging with clients, explaining how we need to help them manage that process.
Yeah, correct. I was going to say, I certainly, speaking to a few friends and a few other businesses, I think that's one very valid point. I know it's in the summary report, is that, be careful about the compensation being offered, because you're going to spend time investing in these people, training them, and if you're underpaying them now, come 6 months' time, if the market moves and there's an uplift, well, you're going to be losing them, right? So it's important to make sure that it's right. I guess flipping it to the candidate side, just to get an idea, but obviously there's a lot of people looking for work. How can some of these maybe stand out? And sort of, is there concerns around, if somebody was to take a role, they're nervous about being, the last one in there for first one that might get let go if the situation gets a little bit tougher again?
I think there'll always be that situation. I think you have to choose the company you work for and don't jump at the one that just offers you the job. The market is improving. I think that there is the LinkedIn fatigue, I think, that most recruiters and a lot of client in-house people are finding, that every time they place an advert, they get 800 replies, and that's because candidates are clicking on easy apply and not actually reading the advert. So I think what clients are doing a lot more now is engaging with people like us, because they get 3 profiles that are screened and briefed, etc. Or they're using their own network. So my advice to candidates is make sure your LinkedIn profile is what it should be, i.e., if you want to be an HR manager in a pharmaceutical company, make sure it has that profile on your LinkedIn resume, but make sure it's a précis rather than the whole lot.
Got it.
And make sure, I say this to every candidate, your job search is a constant thing. You should be constantly writing articles, sharing and liking stuff on LinkedIn, engaging with the people in your industry who you think are your thought leaders, plus also the companies you want to work for. So don't just do that when you lose your job or when you're thinking of moving. Do that throughout your career. There's a great guy, Hussein Wehbi, who's the CEO of Fetcher, and he said, I constantly keep in contact with recruiters, even though I'm never looking for a job, because they keep me current and they keep me aware of what's going on in the marketplace.
Just so obviously I know we've got our next speaker coming up next, Julian, and I'll introduce Julian shortly. But just one of the other questions to kind of go off here, because I know you've mentioned about compensation. Have salaries, I know you've said about sort of lowballing, but if salary compensation, overall package, have they changed as well? So I've gone over the days where you were getting, housing, schooling, something else paid for, etc., even in bigger corporations. Yeah,
I think the UA is moving to a monthly comp plan. I think the days of housing have gone. I think schooling is certainly there with some multinationals, but I think what we now ought to expect is a monthly comp plan, a bonus, and I suspect at some point the flight tickets will go as well. So I think if you were paid as an HRD X amount 2 years ago, you're not going to get that now. You need to be realistic that if it's the right company, the right role, be flexible, do 18 months in that role or 12 months, set yourself KPIs to get a pay increase and go that way. Don't just turn a job down on the salary they offer you now.
And I think finally, and like I said, I'll come to Julian next. How obviously you talked about SMEs. They're very vital to the economy. They make up sort of over 90% of the economy here. How can an SME, sort of compete against a corporate when it does come to compensation and benefits? What can they do that's slightly going to get them across the line, and even particularly if you're looking at more towards the S of the SME, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think I think now is the perfect time for the SMEs, because a lot of corporates ask people with almost no thought, and I think what SMEs have done over the last couple of years, they've created that sort of family feel where they actually care and they will share what's going on in the company. You know, that Ohana thing, the Hawaiians call the family thing, belonging. And I think that's the key thing that SMEs have. Take your people on the journey. Let them believe in what your vision is, but let them share the success and also let them share the pain. If it's going badly, tell them. And I think I would join an SME. We're an SME, and I think our people join us because they feel more empowered. They feel like they've got a voice. Whereas in some corporates, I'm not saying everyone, but some corporates you don't. You're a corporate, small wheel in a huge machine.
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the benefits you have, and my background's very, very broad, but you do get exposure to lots of other areas you maybe never would have got exposure to, and skills that you can develop further. So, like I said, I think it's a great area.
I think you get a voice, and I think having a voice as a professional is one of the most important things, and being listened to and engaged with.
Well, David, thank you very much. David, we're going to get you to join on just after the summary as well for Q&A. So thanks very much. We're going to invite Julian next. He's Julian Franken from RPI. So we'll just wait for Julian. Julian, you can hear us and see us okay?
I can. Thank you very much indeed, and thanks for having me on the WebEx today.
Thank you very much. Julian, do you want to just sort of give an introduction about RPI very briefly to the listeners?
Yeah, sure. So we were founded in about 1998. We set up in Dubai 2001. So like David, we've been here longer than most. We're an international organisation across APAC and Europe, and predominantly we are an industry agnostic technology recruiter. So most of our work comes from at one time the IT side, but obviously these days the digital transformation side. Very unusually in our region, we don't just do the permanent recruitment and executive search, but we also have a manpower license. So that means we provide contractors, interims on our visa and our payroll. And in particular, because you were mentioning SMEs, one of the other things that we get heavily involved in is hosting other clients' staff on our visa and payroll. For various reasons, if they don't want to employ the people themselves, or maybe they're starting up in Dubai, haven't quite got started, and they need access to visas and payroll. So we do that as well.
Well, I was going to say, and my background, I know, again, when I was in London during the financial crisis, that the first thing to come out of this was the fact of, I guess you could call it flexible workforce. People sort of wanted growth was coming, but maybe to David's point, the hiring took a bit longer. So it was maybe easier to get a contractor on board because you had more flexibility with that. I guess just for the listeners, what are the benefits for using, that sort of flexible working or contracting type perspective if you were an SME?
Yeah, sure. Well, look, it's a very mature model all over the world. It's just taken a bit of time to get off in this region because the visa laws are a little bit more strict, a little bit more clunky. And even I still have meetings with clients here where you're explaining the concept of an interim person to them and why that's beneficial. But from a client perspective, it's a lot easier. They haven't got to worry about the payroll, the compliance, the gratuity, the visas, the medical insurance. That's all on me. The second thing is they get to try before they buy, so they can hire someone on an interim basis to convert them to a permanent member of staff. But it also gives you quicker access to that expertise, because what we often find is if the person is on my visa and payroll, they don't always have to go through the same levels of security and scrutiny than if they're joining our client's payroll. Now, that's been quite interesting in COVID times because where you've had an acceptance of using contractors, clients have been more prepared for those people to start remotely because, again, they're not on their visa and payroll. They don't come under the same type of onboarding and scrutiny as they would as an employer. So they've been more ready to say, okay, look, start that person remotely, put him on your visa and payroll. Once we can get him here, then fine, we'll employ him if we want to. Now,
yes.
From an individual perspective, I have to say in this region, there aren't a lot of differences. Now, in other parts of the world, interim experts, they run as like one-man band limited companies, so they can process their payments and their taxes more efficiently. Here, of course, we work tax-free, so that disparity doesn't exist as much as it does. But you still have that flexibility of doing what you want to do, when you want to do it, and working in an interim way. So from an individual's point of view, there are some benefits as well, but not as many as overseas.
And I think as the overall market matures in different elements, I could foresee that this will come in time. When you talk about sort of visa changes that are happening, I do believe that this will add significant benefit as it's shown throughout other parts of the world. I guess one of the things to top and tail on the back of David's sort of discussion, and I know we talked about that as well. There's a lot of people obviously on the market. Clients are looking at the moment, to hire people. But why is it important to look beyond maybe a specific background of an individual? And how, that's point one, and point two, how can an SME again take advantage of that?
Well, yeah, it's an interesting point, and David made some good points on that as well, because as a recruiter, we get paid for finding people. And I think in some respects, a client's attitude is, look, if I'm paying for money, I want exactly what I'm looking for. And therefore, they tend to want square pegs for square holes. And I understand the sentiment of that. But particularly in our industry, where we're dealing with issues on digital transformation,
correct,
certain industry sectors are definitely ahead of the curve than others. So, for example, Emirates Airline is a good example where they were completely just changing their technologies, their approach to the customer journey. And they were very specifically saying to us, do you know what, I really don't want anyone from the aviation sector. Bring me someone from FMCG. And it's no surprise that if you look at EasyJet, for example, their chief technology officer is from Tesco's. He's from a supermarket. Why? Because those industry sectors have a much deeper knowledge of customer care, customer retention, and customer journeys. But the same can apply to different industry sectors as well. So it would be nice to see in this region a more imaginative approach to people's recruitment, exploring different industry sectors that aren't necessarily your own. And again, from an SME point of view, I can only think it would be a benefit because sometimes someone from a different sector brings very different ideas, very different approaches that you wouldn't normally have, first of all, thought about.
Yeah, and I think the important thing there is what they call transferable skills. So, it's somebody maybe bringing something that, I don't know, might be 70% of what is needed, but they maybe don't have the other 30-odd%, but, they have knowledge-ish around that. And I think that's where you can actually find some very good people for your business, because you're thinking outside of the box a little bit, as opposed to you're looking down a checklist and that's all the specifics that they need. Again, David touched on it. I know we spoke about it. Back to work mums. Lots of benefits for this. I'll be honest as well. My wife was a mum at some stage, and she went back to work while my daughter, just after she was born, and in a flexible nature. So, David's got their part of the business that I know has done very, very well. The benefits. You want to kind of run through your thoughts on it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I can't hold a candle to what David's done in this sector. He's definitely made a point of doing it. It doesn't immediately lend itself to some of the clients that we work with, which is a great shame. But it actually started for us through personal experience, in that I was losing an office manager. She was absolutely my oxygen in this organisation. And I just said, look, just have. She was going off to have a baby. I said, look, fine, have the baby, but please come back. I don't care in what capacity you come back or what time you can give me, but please come back. So she did, But to supplement the time that we had lost her, we found another lady who had a similar skill set, equally wanted some temporary hours, was coming back to work. And what we discovered we ended up with were two individuals that actually were overqualified for our needs, but they didn't mind so much about the remuneration. They didn't mind so much about the job content, because they were getting out of it the flexibility, being able to work through the children's school times and so on and so forth. And also, and I don't wish to sound exploitative about it, we'd never be like that, but you do find that even though they're not in the office and they're doing other things, they're still online, they're still there to help, they're still there to support. And our personal experience has just been phenomenal. And we've now proactively used that, where we've had other roles like our marketing director, for example, where, again, I've got an individual there that I couldn't afford in a month of Sundays, but because she wanted flexibility, she's very willingly come and joined us. So I think it's great. And I think, again, if from an SME perspective, I think it must be a fantastic and flexible way of getting some very, very good skills at perhaps a more economic rate. Yeah.
Finally, and before we'll come to the answers from the polls, which we'll come to any minute, obviously, when you're hiring somebody that's maybe more in a senior management position, the cost of that hiring and getting it wrong can be rather expensive. Again, for maybe out of the SMEs here, and this maybe caters to more of the M2E, I guess, what kind of tips can you maybe offer to make sure that particular hire might have a better chance of success, I guess is the word, than not?
Yes, well, this came out of some research I read a couple of years ago, where they'd somehow put a figure on the cost of having a failed hire. And if you're talking in terms of senior manager stroke VP, that cost can easily be in excess of $100,000 of actually hiring someone, losing him, and then having to start the process again. For obvious reasons, that you've wasted all that time, wasted all that energy. Recruiting is very distracting for the client. That person's then come on board. You've given them all the infrastructure and support. You've given them the training to bring them up to speed in your organisation, and then you've lost them. And you can lose them for very simple reasons. It may just be that the family's not happy, or they're not happy with the initial schools, or their initial experience of coming into Dubai or whichever part of the GCC you brought them into has just not been a great one. And you can get around all that by a number of things. Again, ones that we put into practice is, first and foremost, the obvious one is we tend to start our recruitment searches by looking for someone who's already here. Find someone who's settled, who gets it and gets the culture and gets the geography, and their family is settled. Or if you can't do that, you find someone who's been here before or been somewhere similar. But the other one, I don't think you can stress enough, and we've now extended it even down to our more junior programmers that we hire on an interim basis for some of our clients. We meet them at the airport. And we get them it takes no time at all. We get them a SIM card as they land. We drive them around for a couple of hours just to say, look, here's the places you can live. This is JBR. This is the marina. This is Motor City. This is where your office is going to be. These are where the schools are. This is where the beach is. And then obviously give them a document, an onboarding document, which we have, which takes them through everything from renting a house, getting a driving license, getting your alcohol license, or whatever it is you might need. Take all that pain away, and then they can start focusing on settling the family, settling the kids into school, and focusing on the job and being productive and enjoying the lovely region that we're in for what it is. So it's just taking that extra, some people are quite philistine about it and just, bring people in and say, oh, I want a self-starter, and just dump them in the region, expect them to get on, and if they don't get on, it's their failure. It's not. It's ours. We need to spend a bit more time just making people a bit more settled.
And I was going to say that'll probably bring us on nicely to Brett's piece, who is going to come after the polls on engagement. I certainly think, Julian, just to highlight on that piece, you know, I know when I personally came as well, you know, I was having to worry about, you know, car license. I was having to worry about, okay, my visa and then my medical and something else. And particularly, even though I had my brother here, it was still quite a stressful perspective. So I'd echo your thoughts. I think that's great that you're adding that extra value. I think back to your original point that you mentioned on that around, you know, when you're looking for people, maybe looking here regionally, and maybe David will be able to, you know, support that or add his thoughts afterwards. But I would have thought, again, as we go into next year, people in demand, you're naturally going to look within, you know, the UAE first or within the region, because you have the regional knowledge, the regional experience, the regional, you know, skills, and then it will become, okay, well, where are the holes? Do we then have to look internationally? So I think it echoes your points. So Julian, thanks very much for that. I'll let you switch off your camera and your audio now. Just for the just for the I guess the presenters, what's interesting is out of actually the polls that came through, where people were probably looking in relation to what their major challenges, it was actually more around limited budget, which again you can understand in this in this economic environment, and maybe sort of you know, uncertainty around what is actually happening. So I think that sort of, you know, summarizes, I guess, you know, where they're at now. That will be interesting to run that same poll in, say, you know, maybe 6 months' time. Again, where are people necessarily looking in terms of digital innovation, commercial strategy, or industry knowledge? The majority of this is they want industry experience. So that sort of tells me, and I'm sure the listeners and the presenters, is that they want people maybe to come in, hit the ground running, you know, and off they go. And then finally, where are people looking to hire in relation to next year? Majority is leaning towards in the sales and marketing department. Where does that sort of highlight? Again, that highlights that people are trying to grow. They're trying to grow, and therefore to grow, they will have to hire. So I'd like to invite our next guest. Our next guest is Brett Smith from Engage ME. Now, Brett's joined us. He's all the way in South Africa. So again, Brett, thanks very much for joining us. Do you want to just introduce for the listeners a little bit about Engage ME? Just for the listeners as well, they're a multi-award winning, I guess, employee engagement company between Gulf Capital Awards, I think Arabian Business. So, you know, that's why he's got the title of the Big Chief. So, Brett, I'll let you introduce Engage ME.
Thank you for that great introduction. Yeah, I'm not normally based in South Africa. I'm actually based in Dubai, but currently here in South Africa, just renewing my passport. And I think it's an example of how the world has changed, that we can be anywhere and join these events from anywhere. Thank you, Gav. As you mentioned, from our side, we do focus on employee communication and engagement specifically. So we look after the piece once David and Julian have done the recruiting. We look at how do you really motivate and engage your employees. And we specifically focus on internal communications. And 2020 has been a really interesting year for us because it's been, you know, the need for internal communications, the need to communicate with employees has been absolute paramount over this year. And our business has actually grown 3-4-fold because of that. So we've been very, very fortunate.
Thanks, Brett. I guess, you know, as businesses look to move into 2021, you know, I guess the question is, what can employees do to, in some way, re-engage their workforce, given for the fact you've had, you know, people with salary reductions, you maybe had people that have been having to work, you know, 3 jobs, 2 jobs, you know, for the one job, particularly hours additional, and then you couple that with a very sort of, you know, different working environment between, you know, sometime in the office, rest of the time at home. Now I'm not at home, or if I've got children around. So I'm interested to know what you think employees can do to really engage, I guess, the sort of current workforce to really hit 2021 hard.
I think that's a really pertinent question given where we are in the year. And a lot of our clients at the moment are saying, how do we set up for next year? And for us, sort of two key words come to mind, and they're really around clarity and transparency. You know, a lot of this year, we've been so focused on COVID-19 and how we respond. I think a lot of companies have had to reinvent themselves, reimagine themselves. And some companies have lost their sense of purpose. What are they actually about? And I think a lot of employees are feeling that lack of clarity. So, you know, I think the best thing that anybody can do is, you know, we all want to put 2020 aside and put it away and get on with 2021. But the biggest thing we can do is give that clarity to our employee base. What do we want them to achieve? What is our vision? What is our mission? What are our objectives for next year specifically? You know, forget about long-term plans at the moment. What can we do in 2021 to be successful? And more importantly, how can our employees contribute? How can they help us achieve that vision and those strategic objectives for the year? And I think it's also important that we use this opportunity to really reignite a sense of purpose and passion with employees themselves. Let's get excited about next year. You know, there's this, by no means is the pandemic over. There are signs of, you know, things improving. But how do we get excited within what we can manage and control as companies?
Yes.
And how can we set ourselves up for success next year?
Yeah, I think I sort of echo your comments there. I mean, obviously, when there was the news about the vaccine, there was a lot of suddenly relief in a way, but excitement. I think for the UAE, I mentioned it. We've got Expo, that is actually going to come up next year as well. So yes, while it's delayed a year, it's still there for us. So there's certainly. I guess to your perspective and what you're saying, I think transparency and clarity and maybe engaging the employees is a big thing. How do you, how do you keep that engagement and motivation, so high, particularly with, as you mentioned, the flexible nature that's involved, now being able to work from home or work remotely, there's obviously to a certain extent less interaction in the office that you would normally have. What are you finding that companies are going to do or will look to do to kind of keep that piece together?
An excellent question. I think first and foremost, it's imperative that companies continue to put employee well-being and safety first. This pandemic is by no means over, and people feel more engaged if they know that their company cares for them. And yes. I think that if we can do that, we really get us a level of engagement that's higher. But you also mentioned the word flexibility, and all the speakers have spoken about that, and I think that is paramount. Companies have to continue to give employees the option of working from home, working remotely, and being careful in how we manage rotation, some people on-site, some people off-site. But it's important to really give people that option. And then obviously what we do from a work perspective is, it sounds obvious, but it's just communicate. So if you've got some people on site, you've got some people working from home, how do you do that? And companies need to be very purposeful about communicating and finding ways to do that beyond just an email. There's your daily team meetings where we have this. I mean, I'm sure everybody on the call has a situation where you've got some people in the office, some people joining remotely. But what we've done as a company is every morning we're religious about having our team catch up. The 15-minute catch-up, but it engages, you're touching base, you're sending objectives for the day. Otherwise, you can go through a whole day without seeing your team. So it's important to get that in the morning, Being purposeful about your town hall meetings, your operations meetings. And then I think being clever as well about how you use, people are craving social interaction, I think. I think that sense of, if you chat to people have been able to be productive, but they're really missing that sense of connectivity and being able to exchange ideas. And so it's quite nice to have a hybrid model where you can go into the office and see a few people, but you can also replicate that in the digital world where you have, meetings that are just purely social and you can have a lot of fun things. And then I guess the last thing to say is probably make sure that your employees have a voice. And by that, I mean that they have a way of you asking them how they feel and them giving feedback back. And that can be surveys, whatever it is. But drive that engagement by asking your employees how they feel. It's such a 101 thing, but we often forget to do it.
I guess just a couple of points. One there, we've talked about next year, that you're going to be having hiring as you try to grow, right? So again, if people are on a salary reduction, but you're hiring people in at the same time because you're trying to grow, again, from your perspective, engagement, how do you balance that? Because, that the money that you use to hiring, should that be going back to, pay the rest of the salaries to get them full up, but you're trying to grow the company forward. And particularly for an SME, that's even more challenging, I guess, to a certain extent.
I think it's very reflective of the world we're in, and both David and Julian have alluded to this, that salary expectations are very different to what they were before. And I think people are fairly realistic about what they can expect. So people that are working with you, but also people that you're bringing in. And I think I go back to that word transparency, that as a company, as long as you've been transparent with your employees about why you need to hire in and that you're hiring in at a fair level, you're not giving people a higher rate coming in. That transparency and openness is very key. But I think also, one of the interesting challenges we faced this year is onboarding digitally. We've had entire teams that have never met each other, and they are working in companies that, and I think what's been great to see is how companies, I think Julian mentioned Emirates and their customer journey. It's great to see companies looking at their employee journey and how they can embrace digital and still be really clever about onboarding people using digital tools. We've seen companies do creative things where they deliver welcome kits. So there's a number of ways that you can onboard successfully and really make people feel a part of that company. And I think just something interesting that Julian and David were talking about was we've certainly seen a trend that people are now recruiting, not restricting themselves to geographic location. Because of COVID, people are now tending to recruit from around the world, and they're quite happy, depending on the job role, for that person to be based in London or South Africa or New Zealand or wherever it may be, doing that job remotely. And that's a very interesting global trend that we're seeing.
Well, I was going to say, and that will probably be, bring us through to Kirsty next after the next question, because, that's maybe, certainly something that she'll add some extra benefit on. I think just lastly, what additional benefits can employers, and again, if you think about SMEs, can they offer that is outside of a standard compensation package? From whether you call it engagement or excitement about the company.
I think we probably have to use the word theme of this webinar, which ultimately comes down to flexibility. I think most employees are now looking for that flexibility. So it's not just, ladies looking to re-enter the workforce. It's actually everybody looking at, some people have really enjoyed working from home and they want that to continue. Some people are desperate to escape and get back to the office. But I think what we have to understand in the marketplace at the moment is that compensation is one element, but this whole new world of work-life balance or lack thereof that's opened up. And I think, if companies are able to respond and rethink their recruitment model and rethink their employment model, with flexibility being the name of the game, Julian spoke about using multiple resources to cover roles. It's really interesting to see this global trend, and I think that will be one of the big shakeups that come from COVID-19, both how we recruit, but also how we staff, how we run projects. Certainly, as our company, we're communication and engagement consultants. We've been able to extend our pool of consultants from around the world and deliver the same service remotely, which has been a really good growth opportunity for us. So I think flexibility is one element. I think the other thing is well-being and mental initiatives, really putting your employee well-being first. I think that will attract people beyond just your salary. And I think, again, it comes with the word flexibility. It's your variety. The fact that in the gig economy today, you can work on multiple projects across multiple geographies.
Yeah. Well, look, Brett, thanks very much. Really appreciate it. Again, we'll get you to come back for the Q&A very shortly. So thank you very much. Just for the listeners, again, just a reminder, there is a Q&A tab there if you have any questions that you would like me to ask in the Q&A section coming up after Kirsty's presentation. I'd like to obviously introduce Kirsty Chadwick, who is from TTRO. And again, Kirsty, it's been an absolute pleasure for you to join us. I know you're in New Zealand at the moment, so it's past midnight, I think. So thank you very much for taking the time. Did you want to introduce, I guess, TTRO to the listeners just very quickly so they can get an understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure. It's always interesting being on these webinars where we're covering multiple time zones and multiple geographies. As Brett said, it just goes to show that, you know, really communication around the world has become that much more accessible to be able to do these things. So pleasure to be here. So Training Room Online is a company I founded in 2008. We create transformative learning experiences. We're very much in the space of digital and blended learning design. So everything through learning strategies, we design learning content, learning technologies, and learning as a service. We started out in South Africa in 2008, moved into the Middle East around 2015 with a lot of support from Julian and his team at RPI. So can certainly vouch for the services that they provide in helping getting us up and running with our team there. We've operated in the UK since 2018, and most recently I've come home to New Zealand, which is where I'm originally from, to set up an operating branch of the business here. So yeah, it's an interesting world that we're in, and certainly for having spent the best part of this year in lockdown in South Africa with my team there. I think to be able to share some of those experiences with you today is partly why Gavin's got me on the panel.
Thanks so much. You know, there's a you know, the whole sort of theme of this webinar is to sort of, you know, go, as I explained earlier, from, you know, okay, what's happening with recruiting, and then you think about flexible workforce, you think about how do you engage people, and then you're thinking about what we classify as the new world of working. Do you want to explain to maybe the listeners of what your sort of understanding is of the new world of working?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it encompasses many things in the new world of working. It's geographically where you're situated, and we've talked a little bit about that. But even within that geographical location of where you're sitting, the physical space where people are, you know, definitely has played a role in what we've observed and our customers that we're serving have observed in people's performance. It's not been as easy for everybody to adapt to this remote way of working, and particularly in a time where there's a global pandemic and everybody's trying to work remotely. So, you know, certain families where mum and dad are both trying to work, there's small children in the house, there's no school, you know, has really been a lot of what that challenges. But I think over time, everybody sort of has managed to find a way. So along with that new world of working, I think we've started to have to define, you know, are we working from home or are we living from work?
Yep.
And there's quite a distinct difference between the two. And I think initially a lot of it felt like we were actually living from work. We were finding it very, very difficult to create the necessary boundaries to switch off from what work was. I think within the new world of work, it's given the flexibility, which everybody has spoken about, but I think it's also given a lot of personal choice around when people work. So that ability, you know, I have a lot of people who are creative in my team. I've got technical developers. It's been really interesting to observe when they are working. So the normal working hours has significantly shifted with many of my sort of team members in those creative and tech type of roles. They don't work normal hours anymore. No, again, it's yes, certainly I think with that flexible nature, you can allow for that sort of, you know, time difference, time change, but also I think it's to understand what suits individuals in a slightly different way. Some people, you know, might be night owls, so they are, you know, better working in the later morning through to the late evening. Others, early morning risers, so they're actually swings the other way. I guess, you know, one of the things that will come with this as well then is the reduction or the dependency on office space. You know, whether it's, you know, people working from home or flexible nature. I guess, again, I'm interested to sort of get your feedback on that, you know, and where you think that might, you know, sort of start to play as you consider some corporations might not have offices anymore. They'll kind of direct it through to more of a shared office type perspective. Yeah, very much seeing that trend. You know, from our own company perspective, our lease came to an end in July, so we were in lockdown from the middle of March. So the decision before COVID and before the lockdown, we were absolutely going to renew our office space for another 4 years. We had a big open plan space. Everybody would come and it's very difficult to think that we would be where we are now in giving the options around where people work, what hours they work, and all of that this has brought if it wasn't for the global pandemic. And I think that the team, if they had the choice to vote about that pre-lockdown versus what happened when we asked their view, before we made that decision about the lease, I think it would have been very different. So we had over 90% of our team that made the choice to say we wouldn't come back to the office. If you made the office available, we wouldn't come back there. Or if we did, we'd like to come back maybe one day a week. Or, like really not in that permanent way in which we used to be operating. And we've seen that with many of our clients on all sorts of different scales. So I think that there is a different kind of office space that needs to be created. So if you ask them now, what is it that you miss? What they're missing is the social connection and the social interaction and engagement with one another. They're missing that time where you might come together and brainstorm and be drawing on the walls. They're not missing coming to sit at their desk and do their day job.
Yeah, and it's interesting, again, as you speak to different, clients and you speak to individuals, that I think that's very relevant to a lot of people, what they're finding, that social interaction, kind of almost feeling, I guess, to a certain extent, is where people miss it as opposed to, physically doing the job, if that makes sense. Yes. Do you then think that there'll be a return to work? And you kind of semi-mentioned that, but sort of a bit of a combination between the old way and the new way. And that might come down to individuals, that might come down to business operation. It really is going to depend. But, do you think you'll see a blend, or do you foresee that actually it's going to go more swing the other way, and actually it will go more towards constant sort of remote working from home, more sort of digital interaction?
I think it depends on the nature of the business, but I'm certainly seeing that a hybrid is probably the most optimal. And again, talking to the point that it doesn't suit everybody being forced to work from home. So if you don't make consideration for those that are wanting to work from a office space, for whatever reason that might be in their, the respect of what home is in terms of our personal lives, I think that is also going to play a role in your retention of your team. So I think it is really, really key to accommodate. And, Brett was saying, it's communicate and listen. Okay, ask what do they want? What will work best? At the end of the day, we're all here to lead productive teams and successful businesses. So, in order to be able to do that, we're reliant on the talent and the great people that we have around us.
And I think finally, just before I wrap up and go to the summary, just quickly, what sort of technology can businesses use that will help them to monitor performance, again, in the new way of working?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot of technology that can monitor performance. I think the bigger question is around this new kind of social contract and how we monitor performance and what are we actually monitoring. And I think that there's been a big shift in monitoring time versus monitoring outcomes and trusting our teams and trusting our staff to be able to produce those outcomes with less micromanagement than we probably used to do. So I think there's a shift in that. And definitely the technology is there to support us in very varied shapes and forms depending on the business requirements.
So thanks so much, Kirsty. I think we ran slightly over, so probably my apologies, but I think it's been very interesting in speaking to everybody. I've got some questions that we'll just go through, but I'll just go to the summary and then I'll get everybody back on, if that's okay. So just, I guess, in summary for everybody listening, I think the important thing that David sort of highlighted, is to pay people correctly and look at things in a longer term perspective. You don't want to be underpaying people because I guess in 6 or 12 months time, with the investment, you could end up losing them and you're going to go back around in circles. I think when it comes to an interview process, yes, you want to make sure you're finding good people. So you should always be, I guess, looking to try to hire good people. And depending on what that role is, you want to make sure that you are, trying to use the best methods possible. If it's a senior person, maybe you're using a recruitment type company. If it's sort of a middle role, you might actually want to use your own network because obviously, you will get sort of bombarded, I guess, with applications. Allow for flexibility in your business. Could you consider contracting type people? I know Kirsty was mentioning that they actually used Julian's RPI business as a way during their very early days. So as an SME, it gives you flexibility. And to Julian's point there, think outside the box. Are there people that you can get 70% of the skill set from, whether that's a mother, whether that's for somebody with a slightly different, rounded, career perspective that could actually still fit into the business, as opposed to thinking they've got to be square peg in a square hole. Last two things, get to know your staff personally, and that will lead by being, flexible, by being honest and engaging with them. And that brings us on to, obviously, Brett's point, the flexibility next year, the making sure that they're healthy, and considering for their welfare. And then finally, with Kirsty's piece, working from home, showing the importance, of having systems that are digital, but it's important that, you can allow from that, because that will allow you internationally and remotely to be able to work and still do very well as a business. So I think I'll just get all the speakers to come back on. I've just got some questions to ask, so I'll just ask the panelists to join us, and I'll sort of go through them because I'm just conscious of time. So thank you very much, panelists. I really do appreciate it. I guess one of the questions I've got here that I thought I would ask first of all, what topic? Also just before that, there is for the listeners, there's a poll question around what sort of topic would they like to hear about next. You'll see it on the right, so please feel free to answer that. Back to the questions. We've sort of talked about this, and maybe this is Julian and David. We've talked about how salaries and compensation will be affected, as in from an overall, reduction on, housing or schooling. What else do you think that companies can do to offer people, even if they're from an SME, that can really, attract people in? So, David, I'll sort of ask you that first, and then maybe if the others want to sort of add on.
Yeah, I think that the biggest one is flexibility. I think we talked about if you're here with a family, being able to drop the kids off at school, those sort of personal things that are very good. But we've had an SME recently, rather than go down the equity route, they've gone down the LTIP route, the long-term incentive program. And that's sort of worked very well. It's kept people engaged in the business. So as soon as you see the company doing well, then you get a reward for doing that. So I think you almost have to sit down with the people and ask them, what do you want? You'd be amazed at what people say.
Yeah, and you're absolutely correct, because I think some people, to Julian's perspective, actually flexibility is the important thing they want, whether that's with their children. Do you want to explain an LTIP just in more detail for other people? Yeah,
sure. The LTIP is a long-term incentive program. So basically what it means is that you will be set a long-term goal. It could be over 1 year, 3 year, whatever, and it's based on a number of key things. It could be on the company profitability. It could be on KPIs, key performance indicators you've been set by with the client. So it will reward you typically for long service within the company and hitting certain goals. And it's usually used for senior executives.
Great. Okay, Julian, anything to add for that?
No, actually, David sort of hit the nail on the head. Give them the flexibility, ask them what they want, get some ideas. Training's always good so they see that you're investing in them. And yes, indeed, I was going to say about the LTIP schemes, long-term incentive plans, that'd be the best thing to do.
Kirsty, Brett, anything to add?
No, I think the guys have covered it.
I was just going to say, to add to David's point earlier around SMEs being very family orientated, and I think one of the things that you can do is be transparent about your financial circumstances in a smaller company, which actually does drive buy-in, because people feel that they have an overall stake in the financial success of your business.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, very important thing. We just had a question come in. Should job applicants rely on salary survey for information on pay rates? You're laughing away, Brett. Anybody want to answer that one?
No, I would take it as a barometer, but certainly, don't rely on it, 100% at all.
I've got to say, the problem with salary surveys, and I blame myself and Julian's industry, is that often they are done like this. There's no science behind it, and I think it's done on our database or on what we perceive the market is, which is fine if you're an expert like Julian is in his area or in my particular area. But when you see some of these big international recruitment companies tripping out a salary survey, and I used to work for one of them, they are often just their perception of the market. If you want a good one, go to Ipsos or one of the big market research firms that do it properly.
Fair enough. Question, is it a good idea to rehire, I guess, a former employee? So, if you had to let go of somebody during the unfortunate times, is that something to consider?
Yeah, I'd like to jump in there. I mean, I've never really had a problem with that. I know some clients we work with have a very strict policy of not hiring, or they even have a strict policy of not hiring if you've got a relation in that organisation. But honestly, you just cannot make a blanket decision like that. I've seen people I've rehired in my organisation, and have never regretted it. So you just have to take each case as it comes. Absolutely.
Yep.
Agree. Absolutely. If somebody wants to join your business again, then that's them showing they really believed in you in the first place. It also depends why they left and how they left.
And just to add to both those points, I think that something we look at is the offboarding process. So how you onboard employees is important, but how you offboard them is just as important. And if that was done in a good way, so the employer's responsibility to do that in an appropriate way, then you should have brand advocates leaving your organization willing to come back.
Yeah, very good. This probably maybe is one more directed for Kirsty to a certain extent, but what are the top 3 skills an employee must have for the new world of working?
Oh, gosh, that's a tricky one. I'd say problem solving, critical thinking, and self-discipline.
Anybody else?
Just to add
to change and adapt to change, because what we're seeing, again, maybe it's more tainted towards my recruitment, which is digital transformation, but that necessarily changes the business processes and changes people's jobs in terms of what they do from how they used to do things. So you need to be that flexible person, be adaptable, all the things that I'm not at my age. I hate to add.
Fair enough. One other question. Can we use remote talent from other countries in the UAE? And is this legal?
Can you use remote talent from outside the UAE?
From other, yes.
Yeah, it is. Perfectly.
Yeah, it depends what it is. If they're not currently residing in this country, but you're just using their expertise, absolutely. There's no reason why not.
Yeah.
They can't be in this country and working without a visa, obviously.
Yes. Okay. All right. Final question. I think that's come through. So just give me a second. There's a few of them. I'm just working through them as we speak. We sort of talked about skills that they need to have now, what companies are looking for. So Kirsty, you've mentioned about some of these pieces. In 6 months' time, if we were to rerun this again, or in 12 months' time, do you think that, again, there's going to be other types of skill sets that we've not really kind of either thought about or are still not quite there at the moment that's going to, become forefront for the business?
I think it's critical that, we're living in an era with the currency of your skills and the shelf life of your skills is much less than it ever has been. So reskilling and upskilling should be something that everybody's constantly doing. I don't think any of us sit in a position where we've got the luxury of complacency that things will continue to be the same and we don't need to reskill. I think that, it's a critical part of everything we should be doing, and certainly as leaders of business taking that responsibility to support our teams and our staff to be able to have that personal and professional development within the workplace.
Linking into what Kirsty's saying, I think that everybody's been talking about the fourth industrial revolution for quite some time now, and I think that all COVID has done is accelerate that need to be more flexible and adjust to a digital workplace. Yep.
Anybody else? No. So look, thank you very much for joining. Obviously, again, I'm conscious of time, obviously, for the webinar, but also Kirsty, I know you're in New Zealand, time difference. So again, thank you very much for joining. This will actually be on our webinar, so people can actually listen to it, can replay it, and if anybody has any questions, any of our listeners, or they want to be obviously connected to the presenters, more than happy to do it. To the presenters, thank you very much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Obviously, David from Mackenzie Jones, Julian from RPI International, Brett from Engage ME, and Kirsty from TTRO. Thank you very much, everybody. Remain safe. Obviously, enjoy, for those of you celebrating Christmas, whether it's here or overseas, enjoy your Christmas holidays or your Christmas away time with your family. Look forward to seeing you all in the new year. Thank you very much to our listeners as well for participating.
Thanks, Gavin.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Okay, bye.